You are listening to the Dental C-Suite, the strategic alliance for independent dentists, covering the three pillars of practice success, people, profit, and patience from the Dental C-Suite. Here are your hosts.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Kyle Hamilton with the Dental Marketing Agency, and as always, I've got Jess Beretti of Modern HR Solutions and Charlie Beaulieu of Title Accounting.
Ooh, even with the accent.
On today's episode, we're gonna talk a little bit about HR. It's going to be a little bit more HR focused. There was a recent news story on I think it was CTV about the challenges of hiring, retaining, attracting staff, particularly for rural clinics and practices. And it's an issue that comes up frequently. You've got both sides of the equation. You've got the clinic owner, um, who's trying to run a business, and they've got overhead costs and revenues that they're trying to make work profitably. And then you got the other side where the staff and the employees are struggling with either pay or perks or um, general cost of living increases, and how can they manage that in rural and urban environments. So with that little introduction to today's episode, I'm going to turn it over to Jess to kind of give us a little bit more of her insights from an HR perspective.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't like this news story. We've heard this before, and it's a common concern from a lot of dentists across Canada, and it has been for few years now. Um, and I hear it all the time. I'm sure you guys hear it all the time too. We can't find staff, but
Absolutely.
from an HR standpoint, there's so much more to it than just not being able to find staff. Um, and I know I've said it before, but it's rarely a recruitment issue. It's almost always a retention issue. And I know I love to talk about retention, but I love to talk about it for a reason because um, it can be hard to keep staff, but it's important to be focusing on how to retain your staff. And um, generally I find like, okay, if you can't keep people, you don't have a hiring problem, you have some sort of workplace problem that needs to be addressed. But with this most recent news story, I've said it before, but I when I work with clinics, I look at things from both multiple angles, but both the employer's viewpoint, but also the employee's viewpoint. And I can do that because I've worked in the clinic. I've been a hygienist in a dental clinic, and so I can understand both sides. And so, when it comes to this specific story and having a hard time for recruiting for rural areas, 100%. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. It's hard to recruit for a rural location anywhere in Canada, some more than others. Um, but when we talk about that, I've worked in rural settings, and I will say that how do I say this? If there had been incentives to stay, I might have stayed longer, I guess. At one clinic I worked for, my gas mileage was paid, which was huge because that was like almost an hour and a half drive there and back. And so my gas mileage was covered, and that was awesome. The other clinic that I drove out to, there was no that wasn't even an option, and there were no benefits. There was nothing other than my base wage, and so there really wasn't a lot that was screaming for me to want to stay. And so when a job came up in in the city that I was living in at the time, I took it right away because why wouldn't I? A 25-minute commute versus an hour sounds quite a bit better. So,
Well,
yeah, I
sorry to cut you off, Jess,
no,
but
cut me off.
what I'm hearing already, you know, from a marketing perspective, I often tell people it's much cheaper to keep a, a client or a patient than it is to try and find a new one. And what it's sounding like is it's probably a lot cheaper to keep a staff member than it is to try and find a new one.
Absolutely, and I think
Can
Charlie
confirm.
can yeah, I was gonna say, Charlie can answer this for sure, but yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead, Charlie.
But yeah, it's one of those things that whenever we have discussions with clients where kind of wage comes up, like it's definitely something that I kind of advise, like don't lose somebody over $1 an hour, because that's a huge cost to you in both production and training and everything else that the dollar would make sense every day. However, you can't always just say yes to every single dollar, because
That's not
years down the road,
sustainable
it's
either.
it adds up. Exactly.
Mhm.
But like there's like you said, like there's a lot of retention things that you can do that really don't add a whole lot of costs to your profit and loss statement, but make you as an employer a lot more sticky. Things like benefits, things like the paid gas. It really doesn't add a whole lot, but it's something that's actually appreciated, that I don't have to actually worry about the miles on my vehicle that I'm doing. So there is a lot of things you can do, and just I'll let you dive into that because you know it a lot better than me. But
I
yeah.
mean, you can tell me cost-wise what's realistic, but I go
Yeah.
back to the basics, like even a scrub allowance, and that's something I was just chatting about with another hygiene friend this morning. Having a scrub allowance is huge. Like
Yeah.
that goes a long way. Um, I mean, it doesn't have to be super extensive, but we've talked about this in the past, but contributing to continuing education, that's a huge
Yep.
deal. Paying your license, your assistant's license, your therapist, your hygienist license, that's huge. Like that's a significant cost that um, helps a lot of people out, a lot of employees out, but it goes a long way.
It does. And to your point on that too, I would also encourage you to do these things, but you don't have to pay these up front. Put it in the fact of a rebate. Okay.
Well,
So person joins you, they work for the year for you, you give them a rebate on last year's um, license fees.
yeah,
Okay. So you got that year's worth of production out of them,
yes,
and then you paid their license fees. And really and truthfully, they're not that expensive. And the same thing too, you give them a partial rebate. If they're only there for 6 months, they get half of it back, right?
yeah,
It's those little things that don't actually add up, but you got the production. Don't pay it up front, because if they leave in 3 months, then you paid for their work for
100%. And
for the
I'm
year.
glad you said that because that's something I talked to clinic owners about often. And so I'm glad that
Yeah.
you've confirmed that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. I encourage it. It's a small, and it's really and truthfully, I think a lot of times, and you can probably confirm this, just like it's more or less about making that employee feel like actually cared for and like taken care of. That, the doctor isn't looking at you as just another cost of my profit and loss that's taken away from my next vacation home. That, it's like, actually, I want you to do well. I want you to do well in this career. I want you to grow. And I think that from the employee side speaks a lot to their value in being there, and makes them a lot more hardy against other offers.
100%. That speaks volumes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, this talk reminds me of growing up in my dad's clinic, and one of the policies that he had is every month he would take everybody out in the office out for lunch. It's not a huge expense in the grand scheme of things, but just seeing, even as a young kid, and seeing how people responded to that simple act of recognition for the work that they've been doing, and showing them that they're valued as a member of the office. My dad had turnover, but I wasn't huge,
Yeah. Let's see. So that stuck with you. You've been seeing that as
and that
well.
stuck with me. Like, just as a young person watching how to run a business in an office,
Yeah.
recognizing, these little things can make a huge difference. And
Go a long way.
I'm reminded of another story of when I was later on in my teenage years. He contracted me to find one of my friends to go and anonymously drop a tent off. It's not his receptionist, but one of the other dentists in the office, at her front door. She'd had a few issues, and it was Christmas time, and he had heard that she'd been hoping to take the kids camping, but then they had a water tank issue, and
all the money was going to be going towards that, so they weren't going to be able to afford to buy a tent, and yet so he went out and he bought a tent and dropped that off anonymously.
Hmm.
To this day, I don't think she knows where it came from, but it's one of those things, those little things
Wow.
of appreciation that
And that wasn't even for his own
it wasn't even for his
employee.
own
Like,
employee.
so I mean, like that's a huge thing, but something like that would stick with a person, and
Yeah,
or something like if you look at something that big and then you even compare it to the smaller items like going on taking your staff out every month for lunch like that, like, you know, it sticks with people and people appreciate that and they look forward to it and it all goes
yeah.
to, it's a simple retention strategy. I think,
So
sorry.
And sorry, I'm gonna, just before you jump into this, that person that you retain for 2, 3, 4, 10 years will outproduce any other person you hire in that position for the same wage, guaranteed.
Hmm.
I think that's another really key point in this too, is that when you show care and value to your employees, they're also going to have your back as a dental owner,
Oh,
and
for
they're going
sure.
to go to bat for you, and they're going to outperform any other person you might put in there, in 6 months or whatever, because they actually care. They care about the whole business, right?
Mhm.
And it goes into the details too. They'll take more care in their work. They take more care in the way they treat the patients. And that all ties back into patient experience and growth and all that stuff. So it really is like a whole side of things that like intangible. You can't calculate it, but it is there 100%.
For sure. And I think like it is important to say like, you know, I don't think any of us are saying that you'll never have turnover. It's in any industry you have
That
turnover.
happens.
It's just a
Yeah.
matter of what does that turnover rate look like and what are you doing about it? And I do find that,
Natural turnover is fine.
yeah, 100%. People
Yep.
move, people change careers, and there's so many reasons for it. But I think what we see a lot in dentistry is there's high turnover, and for usually the same reasons. Employees are burnt out. Practice owners are too for different reasons, but employees are burnt out.
Yep.
There's a lot that's demanded of them in a short amount of time. They're expected to, let's see, say a hygienist even is expected to do a full care appointment in 60 minutes, but which actually turns into 40 minutes or 35 minutes when they actually get, you know, the updated medical history, charting, everything out of the way. Yeah, it's just, there's a lot that's expected of employees. And so I think that's one reason why the burnout is quite high and they're not seeing a lot of,
Yep.
again, incentive to continue working at that kind of rate or that expectation level, I guess. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, turnover is inevitable in any industry, especially dentistry. It's just we seem to see a lot more of it in dental, unfortunately. The one thing I'll say too is like we've seen these news stories, and um, what I see is that it's always the opinion of the clinic owner, whether that's the dentist or someone else that owns a clinic that's a non-practicing dentist. But there's never really the insights from the therapists, the admin staff, the assistants, or the hygienists. It's or the sterilizing team, in the back. And so I think from an HR lens, that's a major red flag. So if you're not hearing, from your employees, and you're just,
both sides of the story.
yeah, if you're not
Yeah.
exactly both sides of the story, to me that signals, okay, you as a practice owner likely don't have feedback systems in place, or maybe employees don't feel safe speaking up. And that's, a whole nother topic. But I think it's important to, when we hear these news stories, to really consider both, like Kyle said, both sides, how
Yeah.
the employees are feeling about it and how the employer is feeling about it. So I don't want to discredit, the struggle that practice owners are having. Like I do understand that. I work with lots of clinic owners that are struggling to find people. But again, it usually goes back to, like we talk about all the time, are there systems in place to kind of counteract that recruitment challenge?
Now, when we hear these stories, a lot of times, and you go to the comments section, it's you're not paying enough, or they deserve more for the work that they're doing. Um, what do you guys think about that? What's your immediate response, and what's your considered response?
I do you mind, Charlie, if I just real quick. Sorry.
Go for it. Go for it.
And then
Absolutely.
from the money aspect, then you need to rein me in. But I'll honestly say that the majority of staff that I talk to, doesn't come down to the dollar amount. It comes down to the whole picture. And so I'm talking about total compensation, but also organizational culture. What is the practice environment like? Is it a healthy environment to be in? Do people feel safe and comfortable in their role? Do they look forward to going to work? I mean, there's so much more than just the dollar value. And so, I agree with you. People, lots of comments will say, well, I don't get paid enough, or I quit because I didn't get paid enough. And I think sometimes that is true. Sometimes they're not earning what they could earn, or should be compensated. But it's very rarely comes down to the base hourly wage or yearly salary. It's so much more than that. And now, Charlie,
No,
you come in with the money
well,
aspect. 'Cause
I'll hit you with the numbers now. Yeah. But no, but you're right, Jessica. Like, it typically is not actually about the dollar per hour. If they're leaving for $1 extra per hour, there's probably 5 other things wrong.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
100% of that. However, I mean, yes, we can't just pay them whatever they demand and somehow figure it out. So typically we, from the accounting side, we want to make sure that this kind of fits within certain parameters. And so what that typically is, we want to see the entire wage package under 30% of revenue. And if it can fit underneath there, then we're good. And if we're well below that, then, yes, we can do raises and stuff like that. And I do also really encourage there to be bonuses tied around this, because it's an incentive that, if the clinic eats, you eat. It kind of makes it a win-win. And there's lots of ways to do that in a very open, team-based manner. That the team knows if they got it or not. There's no subjectiveness to it or not. It's you met the goal or you didn't, and if you did, you got the bonus. So there's ways to get around that. But on the other side too, there's ways to kind of analyze kind of down to positions and stuff like that. So on the hygiene side of things, you want your hygiene specific costs, or your hygienist, essentially to cost between 30 to 35% of the hygiene revenue. That's typically a range that you want to put them in, right? And again, if they're below that, there's room for raises, there's room for bonuses, there's room for growth. But once you start getting above that, you do creep into the inefficient realm that can kind of lead down the path of, well, we don't either need this position because the practice isn't big enough, or, you as a hygienist maybe just aren't, I want to say this carefully, not producing in that same capacity of, getting that recare and getting them in, maybe not making them feel, as I guess needed in a sense from a patient standpoint. So those are kind of indicators that, if a hygienist is listening, that you can live within, and you can kind of gauge your own performance within those things too. But yeah, so those are kind of the parameters that we want to try to live within. And like I said, if things are below that, then absolutely, raises, in my opinion, are in order. But on this same front too, the longer you have your team, the higher performing they will be in production in that total revenue package.
Yeah, the longer someone stays with you, the more aligned they are with your vision overall and your goals.
Yep.
And totally, yeah, your clinic's vision and goals, I should say. Yeah.
Yep. And it brings it all together in kind of a holistic package like that. When everybody knows each other, knows how each other works, you can't buy that efficiency with the next best RDA.
Okay, so here's the question. So you said for hygiene, 30 to 35%.
Yep.
That's what about assisting? Do you have assisting?
There's not always,
RDAs, I should say, like registered dental assistants and admin.
Yeah, I don't have a breakdown for them specifically because obviously they're not producing in the same way that a hygienist is, right?
Yeah.
But typically, that's kind of, in a lot of times, gauged by your doctor schedule, right?
Gotcha.
And how productive that is. And a lot of times that can be, there is parameters around that you can kind of figure out. But and then on the admin side, typically one full-time admin. In terms of production per month, between $80,000 and $100,000 per month production is one full-time admin person, right?
On full time. Okay.
So if your office is doing less than $100,000, you should be able to work off of one admin. This does change if you're a direct billing office versus a what's the word? Patient pay.
I was trying to think.
Yeah.
Correct.
That obviously does change because that insurance portion is a very admin
Right.
heavy kind of workload. So
Yeah.
that can scale up if you're just, patient pay. But yeah, that's kind of a parameter that you can live off of. There's also other indicators that you can do, phone call rates and stuff like that.
Sure,
You can
yeah.
monitor that if that starts to drop, it's
Okay.
probably because admin is busy. So there's lots of
A few
indicators
different
like that.
measurement tools then. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one thing I'll say too is like from a hygiene or a therapy standpoint, the production, I'm always so careful on focusing on production because I know that's where a lot of burnout happens too with hygiene roles or therapy roles because they're expected to bill a certain amount in an hour, but then that takes
Yeah.
away from the actual care that
Patient
there's
care.
patient care. Yeah. And so I think there's always a fine line, right? But that's where
There
a
is.
good employer can balance that, I think, right? Or correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong, but
absolutely.
I feel
No,
like a good employer can come in and say, we'd love to see this production level, but
Yep.
Patient care is obviously the most important thing.
Yeah, and I would be, I think a lot of times when you're starting to creep towards that 30% level and below, that's where that burnout rate is, where that
Okay.
kind of demand for treatment versus your hours really is becoming a thing.
Gotcha.
In an ideal fashion, 33 to 35% is probably that kind of comfort zone of, the hygiene department is profitable, but we're not also, burying our hygienists in clinical notes and overtime and stuff like that they're just exhausted.
Right.
So it is a fine line, like you said, 100%. But there's ways to monitor this and also incentivize it too. Because at the same time too, you have hygienists with different aptitudes for this kind of things. You might have that hygienist that's gung ho on this type of thing, and they love a bonus system to kind of incentivize them. But on the other side, you got a hygienist that's like, nope, I like to see my 7 patients a day, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's all.
And you know what? That's where performance-based bonuses are really good. And we've talked about this, I think, before, and could talk about it forever. But instead of a guaranteed raise or even a team bonus, individual performance-based, and having an actual system in place that employees
is
know
objective.
is objective. Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good way to keep an eye on your costs. I would think, but then also make sure that you're valuing the employees that or acknowledging the employees that should be acknowledged, right?
Yep, 100%.
I guess I just want to say with like this news story that we just recently saw and other ones that are similar, the one thing I talked to owners about, instead of asking the question, why can't we find staff? I get them to kind of reframe it a little bit and think about, okay, if we look at exit and retention insights, are you conducting exit interviews? Do you know why your staff have actually left? Is it for just, we're moving cities? Or is it because, no, there's actually something going on here that should have been fixed, but hasn't been fixed, that kind of thing. Are you tracking your patterns in turnover? Are you tracking, is the same thing happening with every person that leaves? Are you doing those kind of things? And then I kind of think about like employee voice, yeah, we'll call it employee voice. Like, what kind of feedback mechanisms exist in your clinic? Or, are you doing employee feedback surveys? Are you doing stay interviews, which is something we talked about a few episodes ago, not just exit interviews, but stay interviews? Are you doing one-on-one check-ins regularly? Are your employees feeling heard or are they ignored? Yeah, things like that. And then again, like it all goes back to total compensation, and it's more than just the base pay. It's more than benefits. Are you offering, what kind of paid time off are you offering? Professional development, flexibility, and when we talk about, lots of clinics think that they're being competitive, but they actually haven't benchmarked to find out if they are being competitive. And I think that goes into certain marketing aspects and certainly the, the accounting aspects too. But I think if you're looking at a rural clinic, especially, um, there's a lot more that goes into that. And when we talk about like things like flexibility, you might have to be willing to be a little bit more flexible on how you schedule your days or, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Now, a- a- as we're having this conversation, I want to pivot this a little bit back to back to the story and that came out, and we've talked a ton about the retention side of things, and I agree. Probably, I'm going to say 7 or 8 times out of 10, it might be more of a retention issue than an attraction issue. But if you've got your retention and your HR systems and pay bands and everything are all dialed in nice and tight, what are your thoughts, Jess, on how to market, how to attract? And Charlie, what are your thoughts around how far should you go as far as spending on marketing specific or hiring bonuses or anything like that? Love to hear you two go at it over that.
I mean, yeah, like I could be way out to lunch with some of my ideas, but when you've got a good system in place, like you said, Kyle, showcase that, and it doesn't have to be like a major thing. It's showcase it in your, like on your website, like why our team loves to work here, and have a team member say, like, ask your your RDAs, why do you love to work here? Like, what do you love about the clinic? And put that on your website. And
I
if you
love
have
that.
is that, yeah? Yes. Oh my
I
God.
I,
We're
I
learning
love
something about
well,
marketing.
because that does 2 things. That helps market your clinic from an HR perspective and attracting people to come work there. But people also want to go to a clinic where they can sense that the employees enjoy their work, and they're
100%.
if the employees are treated well, it's a pretty sure bet that the patients are going to be treated well. So, yeah, I'm a
Totally.
strong believer of sharing your team, sharing how, let them speak about why they love the practice.
Hmm.
As much as you're trying to get Google reviews and patient reviews about your practice, sharing some of those quotes from your team members, that's a strong win in my book.
It's a good call. Hey, okay. And it's like, I was just chatting with a hygiene friend this morning, so we talked a lot about this kind of stuff, and she even said, if your assistant that's been there, your therapist that's been there for 25 years, and you say that on the website, people are going to think like, huh, this is pretty cool. Like, he's been there for 25 years. That's awesome. Like, that's got to say something about the clinic. But and I will say, I'm just thinking about another way to market that, that you've got a solid system in place. Natural turnover. Let's talk about that. Your long-term, um, front end admin leaves. She's left to try a different career or moving cities, whatever. Um,
Well, let's face the fact, Jessica. I mean, this industry is women, and women become moms, and
Yeah, maybe she's
that's
on
natural.
leave, right? Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, you know what? I think that's when, okay, you have a job description, job posting, you highlight those things, and don't just say we offer competitive wages and benefits and a great team atmosphere, because I read that and I think, no, you don't. You're just saying that you want to fill your open position in any industry. So really highlight the things that you're doing well, or we value our team members, and our team has been together for 25 years, or some of our staff members have been with us for 15 years, or these are the fun things that we do every month, or like things like that. That's what I would say. They're like less expensive things to market what you're doing well, but I don't know,
I
Charlie.
like I like that idea from a marketing perspective. Marketing's fundamentally, it's about telling a story and telling a story that people are going to buy into. And yeah, join our team. We offer competitive pay. Not nearly as intriguing as, hey, our average team member's been with us for 15 years, and
Yeah.
um, we're hiring for a position that we haven't had to hire for in 25 years. So,
Yeah.
consider this when you're applying for your job. Is this somewhere that you really want to see yourself
For
25
sure.
years from now?
And it's realistic job postings.
Yeah.
Like those that's an actual thing. Is this job description that I'm posting actually realistic? That's like any HR person that's doing recruiting or anything of that sort. That's something that they actually look for in a posting. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, you touched on it, like Jessica's. I think as clinical owners, we also need to realize that like we employ a lot of moms. Like that is just the demographic of this world. So giving them grace and flexibility is a huge thing, because when the school calls, it's mom that's getting the call.
And
So I
parents
think,
in general, right? Like you have to be, if you have a staff member that's a parent, you have to be,
yep,
yeah, you have to realize that there's going to be things that come up, and
absolutely. And I think
mom is
flexibility
important.
goes a long way in terms of that kind of retention side of things. Meeting them where they are. But yeah, I mean, I've also seen practices who haven't abided by the rule of 30%, of revenue, and they live a little bit above that.
Mhm.
But they're like, I don't have HR problems. I've spent 33% or 34%, but I don't have turnover, I don't have problems, and that lets me sleep at night. And on the flip side, it didn't actually affect their overall profitability, just as a note. So they were still actually more profitable overall than another clinic that was doing 27% or lower or something like that.
Cool.
So like it's one of those things, a lot of times, I especially talk about these, parameters that we need to keep things in and stuff like that. But there's a lot of times where you can go outside of these territories and still find success, great success. So you can use these as benchmarks, but a lot of times too, you can make them your own, to fit your own needs. And I think most dentists would agree that if it costs you an extra 1 or 2%, but that meant that you didn't have to hire this year, everybody's going to be doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or seriously considering it.
Yeah.
Is there a metric, Charlie, of roughly how much it costs to onboard a new employee, depending on what their job description is? Or maybe Jess, maybe you know
Yeah,
something like that?
I don't think I've actually seen a specific like parameter on it. But a hygienist or an RDA, 100%. Especially if you have somebody leave like just flat out, I'm done. This place sucks. I'm out of here. You're probably talking about tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
That would not surprise me at all. Because
I would
you're
agree with
probably
that
canceling
number.
patients. Yeah, you're probably canceling patients on that day. Because a lot of times too, yes, temps exist, and yes, temps can work at times, but depending on your office, it doesn't work, especially in the specialty spaces. It's hard to find somebody who can walk into a surgery or walk into an ortho office, and actually be a contributing member there and beyond Steri. Because there's just so much nuance. So yeah, I would say that it's probably tens of thousands of dollars in a potential revenue you've lost because you have to move things around because you just don't have the capacity for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But also just your extra time now where you've got to post a job ad, you've got to interview these candidates, and the hours that you as a doctor spend doing that, which is $500 an hour or should be. So yeah, and then the training costs, an RDA, even the most experienced one, isn't going to come on board and be 100% up to speed in 2 weeks. It's going to take them a month to learn these things and be, a good,
learn the nuance of your office and your
exactly, how you like to do, your procedures and the way you like to be handed tools and all those types of things. I mean, that's different for every dentist.
A year. Like I know lots of clinics will have a standard 3-month probation, but even 90 days, on average, that's not a lot of time to make sure someone's comfortable in their position in the office and understanding all the little quirks and of every team member and how things went.
I
So yeah, I
exactly.
was
If
gonna encourage
when I
maybe a longer
was
grace period.
absolutely when I was a manager, I always deemed after 90 days, if they were 70 to 80% of the way there, it was a success.
For sure.
Then
Yeah.
then we had a
I like
successful
that number.
onboarding.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So and yeah, it probably is 6 months to a year before they're kind of at like the same level. So yeah, so tens of thousands of dollars would not surprise me.
oh gosh,
Right.
no, I would say, Charlie, easily. Yeah,
Yeah.
easily, depending on the
So
position, but easily, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
And so, bringing the conversation full circle, then, when we're talking about retention parameters and things that we can do to try and keep the good staff that we have, spending $1,000 here or there versus spending tens of thousands of dollars to replace that person. I think that's something that really should be in the back of every clinic owner's mind.
it absolutely should be.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
yeah, I just kinda I wanna just touch on one more thing with this, the most recent article, and I've seen this said in similar, um, news articles about the same thing. It's the, clinic owner will talk about, well, we have HR issues, but they only say that the HR issue is hiring. But there's so much more to people management than just hiring. And so I think if you're, as an owner, if you're only focusing on hiring, you're neglecting so many more important aspects of managing your team um, than you should be, and that can be quite detrimental. So HR
Absolutely.
is retention, like we've talked about. It's culture building. It's um, leadership development. It's performance management. It's designing employee experience and overall employee experience. I think hiring is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, if you will. If that's all you're focused on, you're missing 90% of HR, of people management, of yeah.
I think, and I like my analogies.
Yes, you're good at them.
I I think HR is a lot like an engine. You can have an engine produces 300 horsepower, and that's comfortable doing that. But if you tune that engine, you can get 400 horsepower of that. HR, I think, is a lot like that, where you can take that same engine, that same kind of system, and just fine tune things, and you can get a lot more performance out of that. And that's really a big HR aspect of things. And it really needs to be looked in that regard, not that I've got to hire an HR company and that's now going to cost $50,000 a year to do that.
Mhm.
It's going to cost me $50,000, but I should be able to get 10, 15, 20, 25% more productivity and stuff out of my team, which leads to increased revenues, increased profitability, et cetera, et cetera. So like it is one of those things that I think goes hand in hand in that side of things, and should be viewed from that side of things.
For sure.
Now, one last, I'm going to say quick question, but I know how these things can go. Are there any special considerations that come to mind when dealing with an urban clinic versus more of a rural-based clinic? Is there anything that you would suggest either for the urban clinic owner or the rural clinic owner to be considering and thinking about?
Like as far
I
as
don't know. I
overall
mean,
HR strategy
yeah,
or
just kind of
specific.
overall, like, are there any special unique circumstances that rural clinic owners would have to deal with versus urban? I mean, you'd mentioned earlier, Jess, about paying mileage
Yeah,
for yourself. Are there anything, little things like that maybe somebody hasn't considered?
I don't know if there's something that they haven't considered, to be honest. I mean, maybe they don't think about all the little things, but I'm sure they've toyed with the idea. Like paying for gas mileage, that's a huge example for attracting to a rural setting, and goes a long way for sure. But again, I think we kind of touched on it. Flexibility. Flexibility is a good thing or something to think about in any clinic, but I think especially in a rural setting. I guess if you look at where you're located and if you just have a harder time recruiting because of the location, think about little things that you can add in that maybe an urban clinic wouldn't have to think about. And then, talk to your Charlie and see if those are manageable things to implement, and then talk to your Kyle and figure out how to get that out there to attract people. So, and I will say, I don't think there's one right answer just across the board for urban
And
and
that's
rural,
fair.
because it just depends on the clinic, right? Like every clinic we work with is so different,
Yeah.
and their needs are so different. You can have two clinics on the same street that are needing two very different things and looking for two very different things. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I guess what I should have just said right away is it just depends on the setting. But overall, I think there are certain more things that a rural clinic could offer to draw people in.
It depends. Yeah.
It
It's the
It's a-
answer to
People
just
hate
about
that
everything.
answer. It
Yeah.
depends. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything that you would maybe add to that, Charlie, from a
No,
financial perspective?
I think I echo Jessica's comments. A rural clinic has a lot more to lose if staff suddenly disappear. So that job posting that gets out to 20 people in an urban center might be getting out to 2 people in a rural center.
Right.
And I mean, depends on how rural you are. I'm in
Yeah.
Airdrie. We're not really rural, but we still draw from Calgary pretty easily. But I mean, if you're anywhere in Saskatchewan, then I mean, it's a long way from a lot of people, so you might not get the applicants. So I think just holding on to those people a lot more is more important, because you do have a lot more to lose. And I think if you have to pay a little bit more on that percentage wise to keep the revenue and production rolling and stuff like that, it's probably worth it every day
Consider
of the
it.
week.
That sounds like a great place to end it. If you need to pay a little bit more to keep your production up, it's probably worth it. So unless either of you have any parting words of wisdom, I think we'll maybe wrap it up here. So thank you everybody for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Dental C-Suite.
Thank you.
See you next time.
You've been listening to the Dental C-Suite. For show notes or to ask a question to the board, visit www.thedentalcsuite.com.